Corporal Callum Briggs arrived at Fob 2, the way a bad omen arrives, quietly, without anyone agreeing it should be there. 1 minute the afternoon was its usual swampy chaos. Rotor wash, shouted inventory counts, a radio squawking about a busted generator, and the constant background percussion of rain threatening to start again. The next, a lone helicopter cut down through the wet air like a knife and dropped a single figure near the perimeter wire as if it had misplaced him by accident. No entourage, no handshake line, no paperwork parade. Just a man stepping out of the spinning dust, shouldering a minimal pack, and walking toward the ready team hooch like he already knew where everything was. Captain Hayes watched from the shade of a sandbagged bunker, squinting into the glare. Hayes had spent long enough in that corner of Southeast Asia to distrust anything delivered too cleanly. Nothing arrived clean out there. Not supplies, not intelligence, not men. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, M60 gunner, loudmouth philosopher, and the team's unofficial mood barometer, came up beside him, chewing on a toothpick like it was the last civilized habit he had left. "That him?" Rodriguez asked. Hayes held up the memo he'd been handed 10 minutes earlier. Thin paper, thin explanation. Temporary lend-lease from the Australian Special Air Service Regiment. No operational rationale, no timeline, no signature anyone on base recognized. Just a line that authorized the exchange of 1 seasoned long-range reconnaissance specialist to RT Florida for an indeterminate period. "A phantom transfer," Rodriguez muttered. "What is this, a foreign exchange student program? We supposed to teach him baseball and feed him peanut butter?" Hayes didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the approaching soldier. Briggs was tall and spare, the kind of lean that didn't come from skipping meals but from a body trained to waste nothing. He moved with an economy that made the rest of them, men who prided themselves on moving like predators, look like they were wearing boots filled with coins. His eyes were a storm-dark blue, scanning without lingering, registering everything without admitting it. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't do the standard little performance new arrivals usually did. The grin, the glad to be here, the handshake that said, "I'm one of you now." On his chest, strapped in plain sight, sat a knife that looked older than the war itself, a well-used Fairbairn Sykes fighting blade, polished and cared for like a religious object. Lieutenant Davies, younger than the rest and constantly trying to prove he belonged, leaned out of the hooch doorway and whistled. "Look at this," Davies said. "We ordered a kangaroo and got a ghost." Briggs stopped in front of Hayes, close enough that Hayes could see the faint scars on his knuckles, fine white lines, old cuts that had healed clean. "Corporal Callum Briggs," Briggs said. His voice was flat, controlled, not cold, not warm, just final. Hayes offered his hand. Briggs looked at it a beat, then took it. His grip was firm, not friendly, like he was checking a tool. "Captain Hayes," Hayes said. "RT Florida." Briggs's eyes flicked to the hooch, to the men watching, to the perimeter, to the jungle beyond the wire. "Copy," Briggs said, and that was that. The first few days didn't improve the mood. The SOG men were loud by design. Loud meant alive. Loud meant you weren't thinking too hard about what the jungle could do to you if you got quiet and listened long enough. Their humor was rough. Their rituals were simple. The post-mission cigarette circles, the profanity-laced debrief banter, the trading of rations and stories like currency. The team functioned as a single organism held together by noise, aggression, and the kind of swagger that said, "We belong here more than the jungle does." Briggs didn't join any of it. He didn't sit in the circle. He didn't swap jokes. He didn't play cards. He cleaned his rifle with a meticulous patience that felt insulting in a place where most men clean their weapons like they were trying to scrub fear off steel. "Hey mate," Davies called one evening, waving a tin cup of coffee like a peace offering. "You actually got a voice under that hat?" Briggs didn't look up at first. When he did, his stare was calm enough to make Davies suddenly aware of every dumb thing he'd ever said. "If it needs saying," Briggs replied, "I'll say it." Rodriguez snorted. "Jesus, he talks like a manual." Hayes watched it all and kept his thoughts to himself. He'd learned, across too many insertions and too many body bag recoveries, that the men who survived longest weren't always the ones who fit in fastest. Sometimes the outliers weren't mistakes. Sometimes they were the answer to a question you hadn't admitted you were asking. Briggs moved through camp like a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. He'd vanish from sight, only to reappear moments later exactly where a pair of hands was needed. He checked perimeter tripwires not by staring at them, but by feeling the ground like a blind man reading Braille. He could sit motionless in the jungle for long stretches, breathing so shallowly it looked like he'd stopped. The others called it arrogance at first, then they called it unsettling. Then, slowly, without anyone admitting the moment it happened, they started calling it useful. Hayes felt it in his gut before he could justify it on paper. Briggs wasn't here for a friendly exchange. He was here because RT Florida had been playing the war too loud, and the jungle punished loud men. That night, Hayes told Rodriguez in a low voice, "Forget the memo. That Aussie isn't here to visit." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Then why is he here?" Hayes looked out at the dark line of trees beyond the wire, the jungle breathing in the distance like something asleep but never fully relaxed. "Because," Hayes said, "we need silence more than we need firepower." Briggs slept outside under starlight, boots on, knife within reach, mind already mapping routes no one had drawn on a map. He had arrived without ceremony, and he intended to operate the same way. The first mission with Briggs, coded Operation Nightingale, was supposed to be simple. Simple in SOG terms meant insert, confirm, mark, and get out before the jungle noticed you were there. The objective was a rumored North Vietnamese logistics depot near the border, tucked along a trail that wasn't officially supposed to exist. Intelligence was a rumor mill with a radio antenna, but Hayes had learned the hard way that rumors killed people just as effectively as bullets. They were 6 men: Hayes, Davies, Rodriguez, McIntyre on the radio, a medic named Collins, and Briggs. Rodriguez nearly choked when Hayes assigned Briggs to point. "Captain," Rodriguez protested quietly, adjusting the M60 on his shoulder. "We don't know this guy. Point ain't a tourist position." Hayes didn't argue. He just said, "Watch him." The insertion was clean, too clean. After 3 hours, they'd moved maybe a kilometer. Briggs advanced at a pace that felt like an insult to every American instinct in the unit. He paused, listened, touched leaves, crouched low, stared at nothing for long seconds. Rodriguez's patience was a limited resource. "We need to move, mate," Rodriguez hissed into the mic, voice barely above breath. "This ain't a scenic tour." Briggs didn't even turn his head. His reply, when it came, was a dry whisper that felt like it belonged to the jungle itself. "We're already where they want us to be." Hayes felt the hair rise on his arms. The jungle erupted. Not a sloppy ambush, no wild firing, no panicked screaming. This was tight, planned. AK fire snapped from concealed positions, not spraying but stitching the air where men would naturally run. Mortars thumped in, the impacts heavy and sickening, turning foliage into shrapnel. And then there was a sound worse than gunfire, the faint mechanical click of hidden explosives arming in the undergrowth nearby. Devices set not to scare them, but to erase them. "Contact!" Hayes shouted, forcing his voice steady. "Find cover! Davies, left flank! Rodriguez, lay it down!" Rodriguez swung his gun up, ready to turn the jungle into mulch. But the killing field was too tight. Every step felt like a gamble against something wired and waiting. Panic tried to crawl up their throats. Panic always arrived early. You could train men to fight, but you couldn't train the body not to understand death when it was close enough to smell. Then Briggs moved. He didn't fire. He dropped his rifle as if it was suddenly irrelevant and slid forward into the worst of it. Not charging like a hero, not shouting, not making it dramatic, just moving like he had made a decision the rest of them hadn't caught up to. Hayes saw him disappear into brush and thought, for 1 second, he's dead. But Briggs came back into view, low to the ground, hands working fast, eyes calm. Whatever had been waiting to explode didn't. The pressure in the air shifted. The trap hadn't snapped shut the way it was supposed to. A North Vietnamese patrol began pushing closer, expecting the Americans to be shredded or frozen. Briggs snatched up an abandoned grenade launcher, fired a single round, not at the approaching patrol, but off to the far left, into empty jungle. The explosion barked like a command. Confusion rippled through the enemy movement. Their focus split. "Follow my 6, Briggs snapped. It was the first time he'd sounded like he belonged to command. His voice wasn't loud, just absolute. He led them not back down the trail, not forward into more traps, but sideways, into a waterlogged mangrove swamp so thick and foul it looked like the earth had decided to rot on purpose. Rodriguez swore as he plunged into mud that sucked at boots like hungry hands. "This is your plan?" Rodriguez hissed. "Drown in soup?" Briggs didn't answer. They belly crawled through black water and roots, insects crawling into every gap in clothing. Leeches found skin like they'd been trained for it. The swamp stank of decay and all heat, but it was silent. No branches snapped, no dry leaves crackled, no clear trail to follow. Anyone searching for them on higher ground would find nothing but empty jungle. After nearly an hour, they emerged onto firmer land, trembling, coated in filth, alive. The gunfire behind them faded, then drifted away entirely. McIntyre sat down hard, face pale. Collins started picking leeches off Rodriguez's neck while Rodriguez stared at Briggs as if trying to decide whether to punch him or worship him. "How did you know that swamp was there?" Rodriguez demanded. "That wasn't on the map." Briggs wiped mud from his knife with a slow, careful motion. "The ground fault falls that way, he said. Water follows. Where water goes, there's always a way through. Hayes watched him, muddy, calm, untouched by adrenaline in a way that didn't seem human. He didn't save us, Hayes murmured to Davies, voice tight. Davies blinked. Sir? Hayes kept his eyes on Briggs. He orchestrated survival, Hayes said, like it's all he was built for. Operation Nightingale didn't just change the team's opinion of Briggs, it rewired them. They didn't suddenly become his friends. Friendship wasn't the point, but resentment drained away and left behind something colder and heavier. Respect, the kind that makes you uncomfortable because it reminds you there are levels to everything, and you are not on the top one. Briggs didn't train them in the American sense, he didn't run classes or give speeches, he taught the way predators teach, by existing, by correcting silently, by forcing others to adapt or die. He made them read the jungle like it was language. He'd pause and tilt his head at dawn, watching dew gather on the leaves, and he'd know whether something big had passed through before sunrise. He'd point at disturbed leaf litter, not obvious tracks but subtle shifts, and Hayes would realize the jungle floor was a diary they had never bothered to learn to read. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it landed like a fact of physics. You breathe too deep, he told Rodriguez once, flat as a weather report. Rodriguez bristled. I breathe fine. Briggs tapped Rodriguez lightly on the lower ribs. One sharp, precise touch. Not for here. He showed them a kind of stillness that wasn't just silence but absence. A way of lying prone and breathing so lightly it seemed like you joined the dirt. Briggs called it, almost humorlessly, breathing like the dead. Rodriguez hated it at first. It felt wrong, like denying your own body, but the jungle rewarded it. Patrols moved past them without seeing them. Men who would have died in a normal posture lived because their chests didn't rise enough to betray them. The turning point came 2 weeks later, when they found fresh signs of an enemy camp, something small, transient, likely a resupply node. Hayes began planning it like he always did, a flanking move, heavy coverage, muscle, and momentum. Briggs stopped him with a single hand gesture. He crouched, pointed to a faint mark in the mud, then to the way the foliage bent near a stream. They're complacent, Briggs murmured. Camp is close, too much movement, and they'll hear you. Before Hayes could argue, Briggs stripped down to the bare essentials. No unnecessary gear, no radio in his hand, leaving behind everything that clinked, scraped, or whispered. He took only his knife and a small spool of wire. Then he slipped into the jungle, alone. The team waited, nerves fraying as minutes stacked into hours. The idea of one man walking into enemy space with nothing but a blade felt insane, even by their standards. Rodriguez hovered like a caged animal. We should go after him. Hayes kept his eyes fixed on the trees. He told us to wait, so we wait. 2 hours later, Briggs returned the same way he'd left. No sound, no drama, no sign that anything had happened. He walked up to Hayes and placed 2 items on the ground. A hand-drawn enemy map, detailed enough to make McIntyre whistle under his breath, and a small brass bell, the kind hung on perimeter wire to warn a camp when something moved. They used the bell near the stream, Briggs said. Not anymore. Hayes stared at the bell like it was a piece of magic. Briggs had entered an active enemy camp and walked out with their awareness still intact, except for the small part that mattered. He hadn't fired a shot. He'd proved, without preaching, that the greatest weapon in the jungle wasn't force, it was invisibility. From that day, the team looked at him differently, not as a visitor, as a master they hadn't asked for. Back at FOB2, the debrief was supposed to be routine. Hayes made it anything but. He bypassed the standard reports and went straight to his secure radio, requesting a private encrypted channel up the MACV chain. When he got a voice on the other end, he didn't start with the depot. He didn't start with enemy numbers. He started with Briggs. Sir, Hayes said, voice steady, I'm recommending we retain the Australian asset for continued operations, indefinitely. There was a pause so long Hayes could hear static breathing. Permanent retention, the voice finally replied. Captain, he's on temporary loan. There's protocol, international agreements. Protocol is getting men killed, Hayes snapped, surprising himself with the force of it. Since his arrival, mission success is up and risk is down. He's taught my team techniques that make us harder to detect than we've ever been. He's the difference between extraction and body bags. Hayes reported Nightingale in blunt terms. He reported the unarmed infiltration and the map and bell. He didn't romanticize it, he framed it like math. The other end of the line didn't give him what he wanted. It gave him something stranger. Acknowledge, the voice said. Status under review. Continue current assignment. No rejection, no demand. Just a quiet non-answer that felt like permission. The Australians didn't protest either. No angry liaison officers, no sudden flight orders, just a peculiar silence that implied someone, somewhere, understood exactly what Briggs was and didn't mind him being used. At FOB2, Briggs's temporary status became a joke no one laughed at. Hayes made sure Briggs had the best gear and the quietest corner of the hooch. Rodriguez pretended not to care but started carrying his blade differently, like he'd learned something without admitting it. Briggs himself never asked about paperwork. He acted as if the concept of rotation dates was something for men who needed reminders to breathe. He woke, checked his kit, watched the jungle, and waited for movement orders. He wasn't loyal to memos. He was loyal to whatever kept the men beside him alive. The crucible came deep in Laos. RT Florida had tagged a major fuel cache, an objective big enough to matter, dangerous enough to chew up teams whole. The retreat was fast and ugly. The jungle grabbed at them with the usual greed, and pursuit noise grew behind them like a storm. Then McIntyre went down. A bad twist, a snap of pain, and suddenly the team's radio operator, essential as oxygen, was on the ground, teeth clenched, trying not to scream. They got him moving, but only barely. The terrain tightened. Enemy patrol movement increased. Worse, the area bristled with anti-aircraft threats. Air support couldn't safely push in. No rescue helicopter, no gunship miracle, just 6 men in wet green hell and a wounded teammate slowing the clock toward disaster. Hayes made the call no leader wanted. They would have to break contact, stash McIntyre hidden, circle back once pursuit shifted. McIntyre protested, voice shaking. "Don't leave me." Rodriguez grabbed his collar. "We're not leaving you, Mac. We're just borrowing time." They hid him under roots near a depression that collected rainwater, gave him what supplies they could, and moved away. Fast, silent, hearts pounding with the knowledge they were doing something unforgivable even if it was necessary. Hours later, they regrouped, listening to distant movement. Enemy patrols sweeping the sector. Hayes stared at the map overlay, jaw tight. "If we go back now, we lose all of us." Rodriguez's face looked carved out of anger and fear. "We can't leave him." Briggs sat apart, cleaning mud from his boots like the war wasn't happening on the same planet. Then he spoke. "I'll go." Hayes turned. "Briggs, I'll go." Briggs repeated. No emotion, just decision. Hayes tried to argue anyway, because leaders argue even when they know they're wrong. "You'll be alone. Heavy pursuit. You go in, you might not come out." Briggs tightened the strap on his vest. "If you send the team, you lose the team." He took minimal gear, a small weapon kept tucked away for emergency only, his knife, a medical kit, water, and then he disappeared into the jungle, swallowed whole by green shadow. The waiting that followed was torture. 36 hours of listening to distant patrol noise and imagining the worst. 36 hours of staring at the jungle like you could force it to give a man back by refusing to blink. McIntyre's name hung in the air between them like smoke. Rodriguez stopped joking entirely. Hayes checked his watch so many times it felt like he was trying to grind time into dust. Then, after 36 hours and change, the jungle shifted. A shape moved at the edge of the extraction point like a mirage becoming real. Briggs stepped into view, gaunt and mud-streaked, eyes red with exhaustion. Yet his posture was still controlled, still measured, as if fatigue was just another weather pattern. Over his back, secured with webbing, was McIntyre, shivering, alive, eyes wide with disbelief. Hayes moved forward, relief hitting him so hard it nearly dropped him. "Briggs," Hayes breathed, "you mad son of a—" Briggs lowered McIntyre carefully, then adjusted his vest like he'd returned from a short walk. "How many contacts?" Rodriguez asked, voice hoarse. Briggs glanced back at the jungle, then down at his knife. "Enough," he said. "They're searching the wrong sector now. We can lift." He didn't elaborate. He didn't boast. He didn't turn it into a story. He simply made survival look like procedure. McIntyre grabbed Briggs's sleeve with shaking hands. I thought I was gone." Briggs looked at him for a moment. Not soft, not cruel, just present. "You weren't," he said, and that was the closest thing to comfort Briggs ever offered. After that, there was no going back. Briggs wasn't the Aussie on loan anymore. He was the unit's quiet guarantee. Men began moving differently. Slowly at first, like they were embarrassed to admit they changed. Then fully, deliberately. The old aggressive Ranger stride disappeared. It was replaced by Briggs's low-impact, deliberate shuffle. Weight spread, footfall softened, motion minimized. Radio chatter shrank to almost nothing. The team learned to speak with hand signals and eye contact. Noise became something you paid for with blood. Gear changed too. Noisy metal was swapped out. Loose equipment was taped down. Blades became more common, not for romance, not for theatrics, but for the simple truth that in the jungle, loud kills got you killed later. Most surprising of all, Rodriguez became Briggs's most devoted student. Rodriguez started watching birds and monkeys the way Briggs did, as if animals were early warning systems. He practiced that shallow still breathing until he could hold it without trembling. One night, while they sat on ammo crates under a leaking roof, Rodriguez finally spoke what everyone had been thinking. "You're like a different kind of operator," Rodriguez said. Briggs didn't look up from his kit. Hayes answered for him, voice quiet. "He's not here to fight a war, he's here to survive one." Rumors spread through the SOG network. Whispers carried from outpost to outpost like contraband. Hayes' team got a new nickname, not RT Florida anymore. They became the Shadow Team. Some stories turned ridiculous because men like to make myths when they don't have language for reality. He can smell a tripwire. He knows patrol schedules by the way frogs go quiet. He's the ghost the NVA can't track. Hayes didn't correct the myths. Let them grow. Let them frighten the right people. Let them remind the wrong people that the jungle had its own hierarchy. And Callum Briggs belonged closer to the top than most men wanted to admit. Hayes began rewriting doctrine without ever calling it that. He stopped chasing contact. He prioritized observation, reporting, disappearance. Once, writing notes for Davies, Hayes summed it up in a line that felt like confession. "We used to rely on helicopters and bravado. Now we rely on silence and a knife." And he meant it. The inevitable came in monsoon season. A low-priority encrypted message slipped into Hayes' secure file like a snake. Subject: termination of secondment. Corporal Briggs. Key: the order was administrative, cold, and final. Briggs's tour supporting MACV operations had expired. He was to rotate back to his parent unit for debrief and reassignment. The operational impact clause Hayes had leaned on before had been overridden. The Phantom loan was being called in. Hayes stared at the paper until his eyes hurt. He brought the team together. No speeches, just the message laid out like a body. The reaction wasn't resignation, it was fury. "They can't take him," McIntyre said immediately, voice sharp with panic. "He knows this sector better than any of us. If we go without him, we're blind," Rodriguez finished, jaw clenched. Hayes watched the men, hard veterans, killers, survivors, suddenly looking like they'd been told the jungle was about to get louder. Davies spoke up, quieter than usual. "Captain, we're different now, because of him." Rodriguez nodded once, slow. "If they pull him, it's not a personnel change. It's a death sentence for whoever hits the border next." In an act that would have gotten them all burned if anyone official cared enough to read between the lines, Hayes had Davies draft a protest letter, unofficial, unapproved, signed by every man in the team. It listed missions, saves, changes, survivals. It argued, borderline insubordinate, that Briggs was not expendable. Then Hayes pulled Briggs aside behind the hooch, out of earshot, rain hammering the roof so hard it drowned the world. "Briggs," Hayes said, "the paperwork came through. You're being recalled within the week." Briggs nodded and began sharpening his knife with a wet stone, the soft shing of steel the only sound between them. Hayes frowned. "That's it? You don't have anything to say?" Briggs didn't pause his motion. "Orders are clear." Hayes stepped closer, voice dropping. "Orders don't keep men alive out here. You do." Briggs finally looked up, those storm-dark eyes steady. "The mission ends when the assignment ends," Briggs said. "No," Hayes replied, intensity rising. "The mission ends when we decide it ends." He swallowed, then said the thing he hadn't dared say to anyone else. "They're not sending a team to escort you. They expect you to go through normal channels. If no one comes to collect you, we can make you disappear." Briggs's eyes didn't widen. He didn't react. Hayes pushed anyway, because hope makes men reckless. "I can falsify discharge papers, give you a new name, hide you on the firebase, declare you missing in action. You stay with us, no one talks, we keep you, we survive." It was the ultimate offer of insubordination, career suicide wrapped in loyalty. Briggs kept sharpening, listening to the steel, listening to the rain, as if weighing the offer like he weighed everything, in silence. He didn't agree, but he didn't refuse. He simply waited. A week passed. No Australian escort arrived. No SAS sergeant stepped off a helicopter demanding their ghost back. Headquarters had simply scheduled scheduled Briggs for a standard transfer flight out of Da Nang, leaving the details to American logistics. Hayes felt defiant hope bloom in his chest. He had papers ready, a hiding spot prepped, a plan everyone in RT Florida would have carried to their graves. Briggs could become a ghost tonight, but Briggs made his choice without consulting anyone. On a rainy Tuesday night, when monsoon rain hammered the corrugated iron roofs so hard it sounded like the world being erased, Briggs quietly packed his meager kit. He left behind expensive American gear, the newer radio, the heavier assault pack. He kept only what had been his before: worn webbing, his rifle, his knife. He didn't wake Hayes. He didn't shake Rodriguez's hand, didn't nod to McIntyre. No goodbyes, no speeches, no promises. He walked out the main gate and told the sleepy guard he was catching a lift to the logistics depot. Then he disappeared into the rain like he had never been there at all. By morning, his bunk was empty. His paperwork was stacked neatly on Hayes' desk, squared like it had been measured. Hayes stood there a long time, staring at it. Rodriguez came up behind him, silent for once. "He didn't take your offer," Rodriguez said. Hayes nodded. "No," Hayes agreed. "He didn't." McIntyre's voice was small, like he was afraid saying it too loud would make it true. "He left to protect us," McIntyre said. Hayes didn't answer because the truth sat heavy. Briggs could have become their permanent shadow, but he understood something Hayes didn't want to admit. Becoming a deserter would have tied the team to a secret that could destroy them. It would have added risk. Briggs's entire existence was built around subtracting risk. So he chose the clean exit, the professional exit, the lonely one. A week later, alone in the bunker, Hayes noticed something on the painted wooden wall. A sentence scratched into the green paint with the tip of a bullet. Simple, blunt, and somehow perfect. "When you don't hear footsteps, that's Briggs." It wasn't a signature. It was instruction, a reminder, a motto the Shadow team would repeat to every new replacement who arrived at their perpetually quiet hooch. Years later, long after the unit was disbanded and the war had ended, men who'd survived those jungles still lowered their voices when they spoke of the Australian, the anomaly they'd borrowed, the phantom they'd never wanted to repay. They tried to keep him. They tried to turn him into a ghost that belonged to them. But the truth was simpler and stranger. Callum Briggs had been a ghost long before he arrived. And when the jungle stopped hearing his footsteps, the men of RT Florida realized the same thing the war always taught eventually. Some weapons don't stay in your hands. They pass through you, they change you, and then they vanish, leaving only silence behind, and the knowledge that silence in the right hands is the sharpest thing in the world.